Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to do essentially your first ever geometry nodes animation. I'm going to make it really easy and straightforward. We're going to go step by step. You're going to be able to make this animation I'm showing right now from nothing. I'm going to talk about all of the nodes and the setup and make it so it's really easy to do even from vanilla. Great, so welcome to Blender. The first thing you want to do is you want to go to File, or I guess it's Edit, Preferences, and go to Get Extensions and make sure you type in Node Wrangler. So you go to Add-ons, there you go. Make sure that's clicked on. That's the only one that you might need. And so make sure you have that and you can follow along the tutorial super easily. So for Blender, you have all this objects and stuff like that in the scene. If you do middle mouse button, you can move and rotate around the camera. If you hold shift and middle mouse button, you can then move around the actual camera as well. I use a keyboard that's a full keyboard, which is really important for Blender. You can use the number keys to kind of move camera things around or click the buttons here. So 7, 8, 9, whatever, all these different things kind of move it around and kind of keep the camera placed. You push 0, you do go through the camera view, which is very helpful. You push, let's say, you click the shape, you push period, it zooms you in. Awesome. These are kind of the general things you want to know before kind of moving around the system. Up in the top of the screen, you're going to see a bar that has all these different little workspaces. There's layout, modeling, sculpting, UV editing, whatever. Today, we're just going to be using shading and geometry nodes. So click geometry nodes. Now we're in a scene like this. Click the plus sign right here, and we're going to have a new setup. Okay, so on this cube, we now have a modifier. On the right-hand side, we're going to see all these different things. Like this is for the render settings. This is for kind of like how we're going to render it out. I guess this is the camera settings for the scene. Here's the materials. Here's the modifier stack. So inside here, we have all the different options to do modifiers, and it's all going to be stacked from top down. So if we add something before it, it will impact it. So geometry nodes basically just sets this initial scene or this initial modifier on this shape right here. If we push F2, we can also rename things. So I'll say Geo Node System. So we can look on our scene collection, see this, and make sure it all makes sense. So now we're in a node-based system. This is really kind of intuitive once you get used to it, but starting off it might be a little confusing, especially if you started off in like Photoshop layers. So let's first think about this in, I guess, terms of Photoshop layers, and I'll do some examples to show it. But right now we have this kind of green socket connecting through. It says geometry and geometry. That basically means that this geometry right here, that this group input is going to the output. There's been no change. So if I hold, I think it's Control and then right click, so at the bottom of the screen, you're going to have dynamic kind of options as you look over things. So you see like scroller activate options, right? Hold Control, now it says select, 2D view, cut links. So I want to do cut the link, and now it's turned off because this connector has been turned off. I hold Control and draw. I can also hold Alt and then right click, and it'll do a dynamic connector. That's done through Node Wrangler. It makes it a lot easier to work with all these different nodes. So now let's think about this in terms of Photoshop layers, okay? So let's do so to bring up the nodes, we're gonna do Shift A. Now we're adding a new node, essentially. We have all the different nodes to see, and then you can just type immediately to start searching. But let's do Transform Geometry. Okay. So now we have something happening inside the setup. And each of these nodes is kind of like a function on whatever's piping into it. So we see geometry going in, and we also have these other variables of things to work with: translation, rotation, scale. So if we do X and move that translation, it's translating on the X axis. Fantastic. And so then think about this right here as like one Photoshop layer. And so that's kind of doing one transformation on it. And if we did it again, so Shift D to duplicate it and click it in, it's going to translate it again. Or maybe we wanted to do a different action. So we can then move it on the Y, right? So now it's two kind of like Photoshop layers. And that's kind of how it's working. So I'm going to now remove it. And instead what we're going to do is we're going to instance a grid. And on the grid, we're going to instance points. And this is the most important thing when it comes to geometry nodes. So now, remember, this right here is the square. The grid is just going to be a flat plane. So it can be 2 by 2 or even 3 by 3. That's fine. And that's going to be just a flat plane because it's a grid. Turn on wire view mode, we'll see how it's actually going to look. So up in the right hand corner, we have these different view nodes. We have wireframe, solid view, material preview, and rendered view. So wireframe will show how it looks. If we increase the vertices here, we'll have much more subdivisions on this kind of frame. So let's just do 4 for now. So we're seeing it going 1, 2, right, like this, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's why we're getting that grid. And so then what we can also do is make it like set by a driver. So if we do like this, integer, I guess we can pop it like this. What we can then do is have inside the geometry nodes modifier, we now have this new thing. So if we can click out here, we can impact how that's going to look. So we know this is going to be an integer because all of these sockets we're seeing mean different things. So the green circles is geometry or like, I guess, mesh data or whatever. This diamond, this blue diamond is vectors, and these darker green circles are integers. So it's different types of numbers. So if I hold shift and then draw, I'm going to make another connector. So that way I can have the same value moving to both. So we're going to go and bring up the N panel. And as Blender Guru says, N stands for Nelly. And we remember what that means. I don't know why it is, but N will bring up all the different information for whatever you're looking at. And we're going to rename this to, let's call it grid, like point density. Push N again, it goes away. Then we go over here. We can change this to be arbitrarily however dense we want. Okay. So now we have a grid and kind of like a point density however we want it. We want to make points on all these different things. So to do this effect, we're going to want to do like basically 3 things. We're going to want to have points. So points, instance circles, and then we're going to move them. That's kind of how the effect is going to work. And so now that we have the point mesh basically regularly spread out, we can then say mesh to points. So now along all these different vertices, which we can control right here, we're going to have a point being instance. Let's just keep it at 10. And we're seeing these points. The points are helpful because now we can move them around however we want. So we can do like this, set position on these points. We can then have them go up and down or all sorts of things. One really easy thing of doing is doing a noise texture. So a noise texture, let's preview this. So Control Shift, clicking the grid, and Control Shift, still holding Control Shift and clicking it. We're now going to have that value mapped on that geometry so we can preview it. So we see a noise texture. It's basically just a black and white value moving across all of this different mesh data. So if I make the densities bigger, we can then see it a bit more cleanly. So we're seeing all these different things. So then if we do on the noise texture, we then do to 4D. So it's basically going to be an extra value, the W value, which we can move over time. That will move this, say 1, so it's a bit smaller. We move it, we can kind of see the clouds moving with time. So if we put it in the offset right here, we're going to see all of these points move all around. So we can do a vector math, but it's all moving also too in one direction. So we're seeing it all move up in there, right? Kind of up and to the right. That's because the noise is being normalized from 0 to 1, right? That means all the values of this noise are going from 0 to 1. So we want to offset it in all the different directions by 0.5. So the common trick is you do a vector math. So again, Shift A, vector math, grab this, pipe it in. And it's also, you're thinking, okay, wait, vectors, why does the color work? Look at the socket. It is a rectangle, but color data is RGB. And this maps perfectly to XYZ. And that's why you can do it very easily. So we do this and minus 0.5. So if we're adding a negative, it's the same thing as subtracting. We also have all these other functions inside this math to work with. Fantastic. Okay, so this is coming through. And just right here, we could loop it, make it really straightforward and easy. So we're kind of seeing this mesh data of the points being moved by the noise texture over time. And it kind of could have a cool little effect just by that. we want to be able to use the shading space. And we can't really shade these points too well, can we? So the best way of doing this is then instancing new geometry on all these points. So we'll say instance on points. These are points because of here, right here. So we went from a mesh to points, and we're gonna go to instances. So pop this in. Everything disappears. Why did that all disappear? So we have the points coming in, and then there's nothing instanced at this moment. So we can then click in, then let's say an Ico Sphere right here. We can drag it in. Now we have all these huge Ico Spheres. Let's increase the subdivisions a bit. Now let's say set shade smooth. And let's decrease the radius. Let's say 0.5, maybe even less. 0.1. Is that looking okay? 0.05. Just say 0.1, and here we can scale as well. So Shift A, value, pipe this in, say 0.5. One thing I don't like about this, I actually only want this to go up and down on the Z axis. So you're seeing some of these points kind of overlap on each other. I want it to stay exactly the same, but have it only go up and down on the Z to still have that noise. So what we can do is we have this noise texture right here. We can do a separate XYZ. So it's taking one vector and it's putting it in its components. Then we can do a combine XYZ. And we want to have this only impact the Z like this. Then it will stay exactly the same space and it will only move up and down. See how all of them on the top view, push the Z, we can then see it doesn't look like anything's happening. Push on the X, we can see we have this nice little gradient moving. Fantastic. The base effect is done. We can do set material, click it in, and we're gonna do material here. And then the last thing we need to do is essentially make sure it can loop perfectly for you guys before we can move into the shading. So let's think about this. There's many different ways to have it loop. Essentially, to have something loop, we want to make sure the first frame and the last frame are exactly the same. Let's go on the right-hand side and let's click the output version, the kind of the one that has the little printer shape. Let's change the frame rate to 60 because I like rendering in 60 frames. Let's do 120, so it's going to be 2 seconds of animation. Start at 0 and have 1 step for each frame. So if we do Shift A and do scene time, this node will get the time in terms of seconds and also the frame number. So that is useful because if we go to a math node and then divide by 120, we're now going to get a value going from 0 to 1. So then if we do a float curve, this will remap the values from 0 to 1 along this shape of the curve. So let's kind of look at see what happens when we do this. So value to value, value to value on the W. So it's going to go like this and then reset. Nice. So then when we're looking at this, we want it to start at 0 and also end at 0. So we're going to drag this also to 0. Nothing's going to happen. And drag a middle point in the middle and then push this right here to make it linear interpolation. So we're going to see a straight line going up and back. Now we can watch this and it will loop back and forth. And you can see how it's just kind of doing the same thing back and forth. But what's cool about doing it this way versus keyframes is we can click and drag these and then it will shift how the animation is being like done speed-wise. So we can follow these kind of interpolations of the curve. So now this will perfectly loop. We can change the length of the animation and all these different things by changing the overall frame and changing it here as well. So let's go to the shading workspace now. Up at the top, we have shading. We have the material. To make sure it's working, let's just change the color really quick. On pink, all of the spheres turn pink. Fantastic. I think to do a really cool effect to make it really easy, we can just do an emission. So we have this principled BSDF right now. This has a lot of information and it's quite useful, but let's just do a more simple one. We're gonna do Shift A, search, emission. So we have a shader node, plugging it in. We have an emission right here. And then let's also tie this color to the position of all of these points. So if we do Control T because of node and Wrangler, we're going to pull up all these extra nodes. And what we want is, I think, actually, no, we don't want that. That's okay. We want an object info node. Nice. This is what we want. So Shift A, object info. So now we have the location. So as we play it, we're going to see these colors change because it's moving in different location. And what we can do is do a separate XYZ again, same location. And let's look at just the Z. Because we know that the Z value is moving over time. So we plug this into the color, into the emission. We now have this all kind of changing. So to get this to have a nice fun color, we can do is a color ramp. We know we're going from 0 to 1, or I guess not 0 to 1. We're going from essentially whatever the Z value changes. So we might also want to use a map range. But let's just first play it with here. Because basically color ramp is going from 0 to 1 or whatever the range is and remapping different colors. So let's just do red and blue. We can do a map range. So Shift A, map range. What this node does, it takes the value of what you want. Let's say this Z value. We give it a new min and max, and then a new, like from the min and max to a new min and max. This is a way to kind of add more layers of detail. So I'm just kind of making it a bit bigger. And that adds more of the gradient effect across, right? So we're sort of kind of making it smaller and larger. And that adds more of the gradient. We pipe it in. We still want to have it keep it from 0 to 1 because that's how color ramps work. But we're changing this part to kind of change how it's going to normalize. So now if we look at it, we're going to see probably more of these color gradients. And let's just increase the white value here. And then let's just see what we can do. Now we're losing the shading detail because we don't have any shadows being cast on it. It's just emitting light. So what we can also do is we can also mix in a glass shader. So a glass BSDF basically is just a way of making something look like glass. So if we increase the roughness, the outside becomes a bit more kind of rough looking. So what we can do is we can mix these shaders, this one and that one. And right now it's half-half. And so also too in Eevee, which is what we're using right now, we want to make sure we turn on ray tracing. So we go to here to the render settings, we click ray tracing, and now it will work a bit better. And then we're going to use a Fresnel node to be the mapping of the mix. So Fresnel, Shift A Fresnel, and this kind of makes a little outline. So let's try the map range trick again to see how we can make it a bit tighter. Actually, I'll just do a color ramp. Pull the color ramp. Nice. So if we plug this color in here, the factor is then going to mix these two shaders depending. Okay. Let's add a third color in here and make it a green. That way we can see the area of how we're moving things through. And we want to make sure that we can have the green visible. So again, we want it to be larger, 0, 1. And I'm just kind of playing with these parameters to kind of make it look a bit better. Nice. Okay, I'm more happy with this color mix. Maybe actually flip these two. The blue to the green maybe makes more sense. So what I did is I changed the map range a little bit and changed the color ramp. And now to make sure we can get the render to look good, we're going to need to do a few things. We're going to want to make a new tab inside the layout mode. So I go to the top of the left-hand corner, I click and drag, and I now can have a new window viewing it. I'm going to make this a bit bigger by dragging over here and go to rendered view and push 0 on the numpad to make sure I can see what the camera sees. I like rendering it square at 1920 by 1920 so I can render for both horizontal and vertical at the same time. I'm going to increase the camera zoom. Let's say increase to maybe 85. And I might actually go to the geometry node system and increase the scaling too. So we can have this be scaling as well. And let's say this is N for Nelly. Let's say grid size. Great. Go to the layout. Go to the modifier stack. Let's make it maybe 5. Maybe even 10. Or maybe we can say 5 is fine. Make this 40. Too much. 30. 7. 60. 50. I'm just playing with things until it kind of makes sense. And then we have the camera view looking pretty good. And then I think actually we want to tilt the camera a bit more so we can have it view up. So if you go to N, or not N, we go on the camera, click the camera, push N. Push N. We now have all of these different things. We click to view, we go camera to view. So if we go 0 into the camera, we can click and drag and move it like how we normally would on our viewport. So I'm just going to find an angle, something like this. Maybe moving it more down like this so I get a better kind of height view. And we can use this other screen as a reference to make sure it's looking like how we're hoping. There we go. So now all of the camera is inside the scene. And then we have these little circles. Then we can go to the camera settings. We also turn on depth of field. And then what's also nice on the camera settings, we can turn on the limit right here. And this will show how we can see, and the depth of field is this little X. So let's pull the depth of field back for the focus distance. Right about there. Let's make the aperture way lower. We're seeing just a tiny little slice. Make it a bit bigger. Maybe like 0.2, 0.3. Push F12 to get an initial test render. And we want to get also a plane on the bottom so it catches the light a bit better. Scale 10. Shading, new. And on this, let's make it black. So then when you're kind of playing with the scene, you kind of are just going to play with it until you kind of how you like how it's going to look. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you learned something. I hope this was helpful for you. Let's kind of go over one more time, kind of like everything now that I've kind of like tinkered enough. So in the geometry node section, what we went through, so we made sure to know how to use the group input, and we kind of looked at it and saw how we could turn it from a mesh to points, then change those points positions to kind of animate some movement, and then instance on those points at the very end. So we're kind of able to do it in different steps along the way. We were able to animate it using scene time and dividing it in a float curve, so it loops perfectly. We offsetted the noise by -0.5, and then we were able to set it with a combine XYZ in order to make sure we only had it moving up on the Z component. And we also scaled the noise a little bit to make sure it went higher up. That's kind of what I decided to do at the very end, is make sure the noise scaled a bit bigger. We were able to use Ico Spheres, set them smooth, and use the shading editor. For the shading editor, what we decided to do was we used the object info node. We used a separate XYZ to make sure we get only the Z component, because that's what's changing over time. We did a map range and a color ramp to make that the color of the Z position impact the color of the actual mesh. And then we used a mix shader along with a principled SDF with the color based off of the color ramp here, and also the color of the emission strength right here, the same. And then we used a glass BSDF, kind of have that clear outline, and we were able to control the masking of that with the Fresnel node, essentially, to kind of get that mask. We put it all together in a scene and made sure we had the bottom have a plane to make sure we can bounce more light onto it, and rendered it out. Thanks so much for watching.
Augury.